Welcome back to the Horror Academic, and I'm going to, as promised, finish up that batch of my favorite Italian horror directors, featuring a film of each of theirs. Today we're going to be talking about Michele Soavi and his film StageFright, which I absolutely love. Soavi's come up before in the show when we were talking about Fulci, when we were talking about Argento. He's a guy who's around the sets of a lot of Italian horror films. He ends up acting in some. He was in Demons when we spoke about Demons, so he's kind of been a thread through the whole thing. He was the guy with the silver mask in Demons. He was also in Gates of Hell, Fulci's film, the guy whose girlfriend pukes up her guts. So he's a lot of little cameos in a lot of Italian horror films, but he also, more importantly, is assistant director on Dario Argento's films, quite a few of them, as well as quite a few of Joe D'Amato's films. So now, Joe D'Amato is someone we have not spoke about before. He is somebody on the sleazier side of Italian horror, not quite my usual taste. In fact, a lot of his films are more on the porn side of things, including quite a few of the Emanuelle sequels, including Emanuelle and the Cannibals. And he goes on to make movies like Porno Holocaust and Erotic Nights of the Dead, not quite my cup of tea. So, what is more important though is that becomes kind of like the place where Soavi is given a chance to really do a lot of work. So it is Joe D'Amato who gives him the opportunity to make StageFright. But actually his first film as a director is because of Dario Argento. Argento asked Soavi to be the person to direct the documentary about his work called Dario Argento's World of Horror, which has a lot of behind-the-scenes footage, particularly, it's made around the time that they're making Phenomena, so there's a lot of footage of that, and others, and a lot of interviews. It's a really good documentary, highly recommend it for fans of Argento's work, but this is technically, his first directing slot. What eventually happens then is that he makes a music video for a few soundtrack songs, and Joe D'Amato says, well, why don't you make your own film? So that's how StageFright comes to be. It's Joe D'Amato produced. So, and Joe D'Amato is an alias. His Italian name I will put right here because I can't quite remember. The thing about Soavi is he's kind of like a culmination of a lot of all these guys' work at once. And StageFright is really him. It's his take on the giallo. And it's a modernizing. So the giallo is very kind of synced with the 60s and the 70s. And I think this is one of the films that really brings it into the 1980s. It is very 1980s. This is practically an MTV-style movie. And at the same time, this leads to a short stint in horror filmmaking, but a pretty impressive one. So we have the start with the World of Horror. He goes on to make StageFright, after which he makes The Church, an awesome little film. The Sect, which is another great movie about a cult, and then he kind of rounds it all out with kind of his opus, which is Della Morte dell'Amore, known as Cemetery Man. I have a feeling at one point or another I'm going to talk about all of these movies because I'm such a big fan of Soavi's work. I've written articles about Soavi. He's just somebody that I'm really impressed with his style. Just because it's only really these movies that I'm talking about as part of his repertoire, it's not the only things he did. It's just he made a dramatic shift into television work. He started making TV movies, which is very popular in Italy. A lot of the Italian directors go on to make TV movies. Actually, Argento, a good chunk of his work in the 2000s is in TV movies. But he then goes on to also work in TV shows. So he now is kind of doing what to me kind of seems almost like the equivalent of the what do we call these? Like the crime shows, the Italian CSI type stuff, but a little bit more military in sense, from what I can tell, from what I've read. But talk about StageFright and why I love StageFright so much. So StageFright is a story within a story. It's the making of a play. So it's a backstage story, which is in early Hollywood tradition is kind of an old school way of telling a story, in a movie. So, or a theater group who are putting on a play that is kind of in this vein of it being a very 80s story, a bit MTV of a story. It is done almost in vignettes that feel like music videos from the clips that we see them rehearsing. And it's very much a kind of a play on, the play is a play on not just giallos, but slashers. So the difference, I guess I should kind of like talk a little bit about what a giallo is. I mentioned it a little bit when we talked about Argento, even though Suspiria was not a giallo. Giallos are like mysteries or thrillers, but with a very stylized tone to them, which is why Argento is kind of known for that, because of his stylized view. Soavi also has a very stylized lens, and you're talking about pop sensibility in the use of colors. You have these kind of overly dramatic staged kills. It's a little on the gruesome, tends to be on the gory, you know. So it's playing into all of these different elements. The difference between a slasher maybe and a giallo, besides the country of origin, is that it's that stylized tone. Where slashers are known for kind of being quick and dirty, you know, like a Friday the 13th. Giallos are a little more artful. There's a little bit more thought in, like say, on the cinematography side. The art design and the kind of creative ways of filming. And at the times, those lead to the very creative kills. But in slashers, it's fairly straightforward filming to show the creative kills. So that's kind of maybe our differences. And also there's, like I said, it's a little bit more thriller-ish in a way, but so over the top that a typical American thriller fan would not necessarily cross over into giallos. They're also a little bit far-fetched. They're so Italian, they're just out there. So in the nature of this being out there, the play that they're rehearsing is this kind of like dirty city crime kind of scene about a night stalker figure who is seducing and raping and killing women. But he wears the head of an owl. And this is a play that includes dancing. So it is a dancing owl-headed man who kills women with a knife. Yeah. So it's out there, it's strange, it's stylized, it's different. That's why I love it so much. It's so bizarre in nature that it's fun. So in the story of it, though, aside from just they're rehearsing a play, it's kind of, there's two concurrent storylines. There's also the fact that there's kind of like a crazed killer, psychotic killer who's been put into the local sanitarium, which of course is, as you would normally do in these movies, very close by where the theater that they're practicing is. And one of the girls, who's actually the lead in the play, twists her ankle, and the costume girl takes her to the closest medical facility she can find to see if a doctor can help her, and it turns out to be a psychiatric ward. And while there, they espy in one of the cells. Not sure why they're even walking past the cell. Not sure why you have a cell. It's like a prison-looking cell in the sanitarium. But anyway, so the doctor that ends up helping the girl with her ankle, who's a little touchy-feely for me, but anyway, he tells them the story of this crazed killer who chopped up and killed something like 17 women. And of course, he breaks free that night. When the two get back to the theater, the kind of short-tempered, overly dramatic director, who's, the typical, hot-headed Broadway director type, is, he's livid, just, why would you leave the set? You're not, you didn't get permission to leave, and da-da-da-da. He goes to fire, and in a clever twist that you probably saw coming a mile away, the killer ends up at the same place, and it becomes, in an interesting way, a play on the urban myth of the killer in the back seat, because who would have thought it would really happen? There you go. And once there is a death because of the killer, the cops come, they're on the lookout, they tell, of course, the crew what's going on. Oh, well, there's death, but there's killer escape, and Our director, when the press show to cover the death, the murder, he quickly changes the plot of his play to match closer to the actual events of the killer. And there you go. Even though they're all supposed to be locked down and no one's supposed to be back into the facility, he locks everybody inside and they rework the play and are supposed to stay all night revamping it. Obviously, more murders ensue, or it wouldn't be a giallo. The murders get bloodier and bloodier as we go. The kind of set pieces of the film start to get more and more bizarre. And there's probably the grandiose set piece of the film is on the stage, the killer, who's now come into possession of the owl head, lays out all his victims on the stage with him, like mixing them with mannequin bodies. It's that weird place in between a slasher and a giallo, and most of it is because how tongue-in-cheek the play within the movie is about a slasher or a giallo at the same time. So add that super 80s MTV look to it, or the fact that they are trying to emulate what MTV is very much in their early stages looks like, and you have this particularly modern for the time. Of course, now it's like a period piece, but it's a story that's so visual in nature because of all of those things that it's a fun watch. And I've seen StageFright many times. I love it. I will mention also at this point, StageFright is also released under, as an Italian film often is, it's been released under various titles. The other titles it went by were Deliria and Aquarius, The Bloody Bird, and The Soundstage Massacre. So all of the titles, in one way or another, kind of give away quite a bit of what you're in for. So I absolutely love this film, and like I said, it's this combination of all these kind of frenetic elements that lead it to such a... It's a movie that feels like a very long music video in many ways. And it shows very well what Soavi learned from all that time spent working with people like Argento. And I think it's a great first foray as a horror director. As I said with Soavi, he directs a handful of amazing films. As for the cast of the movie, like I said, our director is a very much a stereotype of what that kind of over-the-top artiste, hot-headed director can be in a theater experience. At the same time, we also see a lot of the other stereotypes of what theater life is. So the dancers / actors, you have the over-the-top kind of the ingenue, who's like, who's a little bit buttoned down but becomes actually quite perfect for things. The star, who's kind of our final girl if this were a slasher. You have the girl who's pregnant, and her boyfriend is one of the guys who's a dancer. You have the over the top kind of gay stereotype of the flamboyant dancer, who's played by one of the more famous kind of actors of this period, John Morgan. So that's a good place to start as far as the actors. John Morgan, whose real name I have written down here, by the way, Giovanni Lombardo Rodis, is John Morgan, his real name. John Morgan, who was in Gates of Hell, which is where he met Soavi, and Soavi remembered him and asked him to be part of the film. So John Morgan was in a whole mess of pretty big Italian horror movies at this time, including House Days of the Park, City of the Living Dead, which is also Gates of Hell, Cannibals in the Streets, which is also Cannibal Apocalypse, Cannibal Ferox, also known as Let Them Die Slowly. He's in a lot of movies that have more than one name. So I mean, he's kind of all over the place in this kind of period in Italian horror, that early 80s. And recently, he was also in the remake, the kind of big budget remake of The Omen. So he is he's kind of like a pretty big actor out there in the scene. He also is an actor who has a history in porn. Not uncommon in Italian filmmaking at this time. Like I said, Joe D'Amato and all that. And John Morgan, by the way, also shows up in both The Church and The Sect. So, a couple other actors that I wanted to point out are two kind of female leads, or the two main female characters. The character of Alicia is played by Barbara Capisti. She was in quite a few horror films too: New York Ripper, Opera, The Church, and Della Morte dell'Amore. So, it seems like once Soavi knows he likes somebody, he keeps working with them. And another character, Laurel, who's also pretty big, played by Mary Sellers, who was also in a few other Italian horror films, Ghost House, Mask of Satan, and The Crawlers. And she goes on to become a director in her own right, so that's pretty cool. David Brendan is the director. His name's Peter in the film. He's in a lot of Italian movies, but not necessarily in the horror side of things. More like the Sword and Sandals kind of end of it. A couple of the racier stuffs, but not so much horror after StageFright. So that's pretty much, those four kind of sum up what I want to say with the actors. I would also like to note, while I said Soavi shows up in a lot of other people's films, he also has a small cameo in this film. Once the first killing happens, the cops put a cop car on patrol, and there's the two cops hanging out in there. Of course, they're kind of the comedy relief that we cut back and forth on as they sit around bored, eating their lunch and whatnot. And the young cop in the car, that's Soavi. So, other things I wanted to mention about this film, because it's really about this kind of visual style that I really dig. It's that pairing of slashers and giallos. So it's kind of taking a lot, not just from, say, the films of like Argento, but also what was going on in the 80s, kind of in American horror too. So it kind of brings that into and kind of modernizes in that way. But again, very influenced though by MTV. This is only 1987, so it's really when MTV is starting to really kind of get going. Like I said, we have that kind of take on the killer in the backseat myth, which is always fun to see how the kind of like gets revamped through the ages. The tradition of a backstage musical, one of the oldest kind of Hollywood routines. And the other thing, like I said, well, this is more of a, in a giallo sense than a slasher sense, is it is a bit more of a mystery, because it takes quite a bit actually from Agatha Christie. It's also an interpretation of 10 Little Indians. You have all of the actors and the crew for the play that are trapped within inside the theater start to slowly disappear one after another. So there's also this idea of how did the killer get in, and if the killer got in, who is he? Because they don't, as far as they know, no one else has gotten into the building. So, and of course it's a theater set, so you can, there's costumes, so, it's easy to be concealed, which leads to the mystery sense of it. It's just a lot of fun. I really, I think this movie doesn't get talked about enough, and I feel like it's my job to be the one to talk about it. I just love this film. As far as editions of this movie, I only have two. I have this, the Deluxe Collector's Edition on DVD, which came out, let's see, this version came out in 2000. This version came out in 1999 by EC Entertainment. It is an English language version. It does not have an Italian track. We have, as listed as our special features here, I'll tell you, we got the newly remastered from the original 35mm negatives, the music video of the score, the theatrical trailer, Michele Soavi biography and filmography, and the theatrical matte option. So, I mean, I was just pretty psyched to get a good copy of this. It's just, one I needed to have in my collection. The Blu-ray that I picked up for this is the Blue Underground edition. I think they did a great job of really punching up the quality of the image. So it's a great print. as far as the extras, this one, let's see. So this is the, this edition's from 2014. As far as extras, we have Theater of Delirium, which is the interview with Soavi, Head of the Company, interview with David Brandon, the actor, Blood on the Stage, Lombardo Radice, the Owl Murders, interview with the special makeup effects artist, the Sound of Aquarius, the interview with the composer, which was pretty cool. I really dug these extras. There's a really interesting, in the discussion with Soavi, it's really cool how he talks about why he really preferred the options to be assistant director more than director on films, because he felt that he was constantly learning from all these great people. He talks in it about how there were opportunities sometimes where he had to choose between directing a film himself and ADing a film for someone else. And he talks about, you know, how some of these great opportunities he had as an AD. And one of these opportunities that came around for him to AD that I did not know about till this interview was that he was the assistant director on Terry Gilliam's Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is an amazing film that I have loved since I was a kid. And this is just visually such a stunning film, and to imagine that he got to shoot some of those more bizarre sequences as the AD, it's just amazing that he got to work on such a wonderful film. And I could see that that would totally make sense. It's like, do you want to direct your own film or work on the Terry Gilliam film? I'm with him. I would totally want to see Terry Gilliam in action. So hats off for that. So yeah, so I definitely say this edition from Blue Underground, totally worth it. Highly recommend. I believe there's another edition out there as well, but this is the one that I went with because I was pretty blown away. So there we go, guys. That's StageFright, also known as Aquarius, also known as Deliria, also known as the Soundstage Massacre. What an awful name. Also known as the Bloody Bird. It's just a wacky, zany, giallo fun fest who just happens to center around a killer wearing an owl head, like you do. So that's my movie for today. I thank you guys for tuning in and hearing me blubber about a film I absolutely love from one of my favorite directors, Michele Soavi. I hope you guys have enjoyed this look at some of my favorite Italian films. This will happen more. I'm definitely, now that I've made myself aware of the fact that I hadn't been doing films from other countries as much, I definitely will have, I have a stock of Italian horror films that I hope to delve into soon. So thanks again for watching The Horror Academic, and I will see you guys next month. Bye.